Well, welcome all the survivors. This became from a really nice venue to like a sauna. I think that's the transformation we've experienced here.
Yeah, so you're saying the discussion is heated up?
Yeah, I mean, we need something spicy here, clearly.
Okay, good. We can bring that. So I figure we'll ask some questions. I don't know if you want to start or I can...
Go for it.
Okay. Well, so I think the thing that...
Sir, Mike.
Oh, there we go. All right. I want to start with where does this all end up, right? 5 years from now, if chain abstraction makes a difference, what's the difference that it makes? You know, what have we changed in the world if we succeed at this stuff?
What kind of if is that? Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question because from my perspective, there's been maybe 3 phases of blockchain so far. It started with Bitcoin, right? Kind of introducing the idea, and everybody kind of was excited about it, was trying to see what they can do around it. Then you had Ethereum, which introduced kind of this programmability environment, and that got, a lot more people in. There was more ideas. Most of them didn't work, but some things actually made progress. And then we have this like explosion of infrastructure that happened afterwards. And it was kind of driven by the fact that people tried to build things in 2017 and they couldn't, right? None of the actual applications worked. And so I think kind of what chain abstraction is doing is bringing this next phase, right? That infrastructure kind of going away on the background. And to give you like maybe a way to contrast this, right? When internet was developing, right? We also had like a set of phases, right? You had ARPANET and kind of, academia, where, there's some geeks like sending packets to each other. You had like...
Represent that.
You had early internet, right? Where, you had like, you can send an email to each other and it was cool and, there's early web pages. And then there's like massive build out of infrastructure that happened afterwards where people were like, okay, everything will be on the internet. And, it didn't really work yet for various reasons. And then it took some years to actually build proper applications.
I have a slide with a picture of the sock puppet from pets.com that died, and when the internet bubbles, it looks astonishing like a bored ape. And you put those next to each other, and it's so clear that was the same pattern.
Yeah, I mean, and the .com were pretty much meme coins, right, of the past. So. And so I think like we are in this transformation. This is what I think driving with chain abstractions. Like we're transforming away from like, okay, everything has a .com, everything is a meme coin that you need to buy in early, to hey, these are actual useful applications that coming out of this. Few will survive, most will be started afterwards, and I think we'll come to a world where, same as you don't think about like the fiber that's, probably serving Wi-Fi right now, and like if the Wi-Fi network is Cisco or something else, right? We're gonna get to that stage as well. And, there's still a lot of things like security and recoverability, all kinds of stuff that needs to be like polished and solved, but that's kind of the world I'm looking forward, the application world, the user-owned internet world.
There's a phase, I'm curious whether it'll align with this, of, crypto launched and got the ball rolling with pure financial stuff. I think a big part of that reason is because those could be on chain. And interfacing to the dirty real world is uncomfortable and difficult and challenging and requires the KYCs and the disciplined execution and that sort of stuff. To me, the chain abstraction where it's very user-focused, it's, we actually have to solve problems users have, that's really important. There's sort of at the same time this real-world asset thing coming in, which is, painful, stretching its legs out of pure digital environment into actually interfacing to the systems we have in TradFi that people actually want to see. Do you see any connection between, chain abstraction and real-world assets, or are they just different threads that will eventually stitch together? How does that show up in your world? Yeah,
I feel it's gonna kind of be parallel threads where, the chain abstraction is indeed the user interface, the way you access the assets, and, the assets will come and be on different places. We'll have, the Omni assets. We'll have the, I mean, like if you think of it, USDC and USDT are an Omni asset, right? It's available in multiple chains. There's a way to like natively transport it between, and we'll see more of those, especially for real-world assets. It makes sense to have, them available in multiple. And then on the other side, we'll have through chain abstraction more of the aggregated liquidity, where you don't actually need to think about which chain the asset is issued. You're just gonna get it, and there's a set of guarantees around that. So I think like it's kind of two sides of like real-world asset is more of a supply, and then chain abstraction is more of a demand side.
Interesting. One of the things you mentioned something that I've started to see a little bit of people confused about with respect to chain abstraction, where it's not hiding the details, it's abstracting the details. The example I had this morning, or the analogy this morning of travel sites where I just want to fly into Brussels. Some people will care whether it's United versus Delta. Some people will care first class versus coach. But once they make that decision, they push the button, right? A year ago, a year and a half ago, you mostly didn't care what bank you were doing. But wow, suddenly in May, a lot of people cared about Silicon Valley Bank because suddenly it was no longer a counterparty I could ignore. And so there's this. It's not about hiding the details. It's about once I make my decision, then I can just use it in a uniform fashion. I'm curious whether you see that show up in the applications you're talking about, or whether you're focused more on the hiding stuff, or?
I mean, there's definitely people want to, like, kind of, maybe the way to explain it, there's two sides, right? There's one side which is kind of asset issuers, developers, who do care about the counterparty risks more, because at the end they're building a business one way or another. And they care about this. They want to choose the best network, but then they don't want to limit themselves to just the kind of user base of that ecosystem of that network. Yeah, and so that's where the other side of this is users who want to, be able to participate in the economy, in the assets, in the applications, and I think users. With the banks, the same, right? Like, don't fully understand all the repercussions, and I don't think anybody's like sitting there and like fully reading in what FDIC actually does, and what is all the corner cases, et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. And so we kind of need to get to the same level where maybe you have some insurance on top or whatever, but it's kind of on the developer and asset issuer side to really provide you with the experience, right? And the thing is, like, if you issued an asset and that chain, for example, stopped and crashed and burned, well, it doesn't matter. Like, if as a user I chose a more secure chain, I still needed to access that asset, and it crashed and burned at the end anyway. So, like this example, like if you bought, USD on Ethereum, it was still going to zero, right? Or whatever, 0.001. Somehow it's still not zero, right? So I think, this is kind of the, at the end, it's going to be, set of product decisions as well, where same as, as you said, travel websites kind of surface information about, okay, well, maybe you should not buy some random airline that, showed up yesterday. Or maybe
we're looking at you, Spirit and Ryan.
Yeah, or you show maybe how many planes have crashed of that airline when you are choosing what to buy, right? So
the travel sites did in fact add a selector, so you could say, and I don't want to fly on these Boeing airlines.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we'll see more of that, where the products themselves will provide kind of additional. I actually think all of the information about assets, all of the information about applications should be on chain. And registering the assets should happen on chain, where you publish whatever the information, distribution, et cetera. All of that should be, and then every wallet, every exchange, every app can pull that information, attach it to your token. And when you're buying some asset, you're going into bank and says this is initial distribution, this is what happened. And then you're going into some meme coin launched 5 minutes ago and shows hey, this asset exists 5 minutes. It has initial distribution of 99% in one address, and you can make a decision. Maybe this is the stuff you're into, and then you go, or maybe you go and do something else, right? So I think we need that level of experience, and so it's abstracting the complexity of like going and figuring out like in the Explorer, right? Maybe there's a chart somewhere, but actually bringing the relevant information in the relevant context.
I've seen, you know, so chain abstraction has this spectrum of people working on different parts, right? We got the folks that want to do it in the wallet, the account abstraction is a part of it, there's people talking intents, et cetera. It is, one of the things that I'm excited about there is you see some applications where they're really trying to deliver a good application, but they have to do it right now off-chain, right? You know, and Barry was up here from Skip that have their, you know, IBC fund, and that's the, you know, take my token from there, get it over there, do whatever steps you need, and then you have to, it presents you with all the signatures you have to sign in order to make it happen, but at least that plan and that route and all that could do for me, and so it's sort of half off-chain, half on-chain, with the big part of the computation off-chain, and, you know, there's sort of this how much can we migrate on-chain? How much do we end up having to rely on third parties off-chain? My goal of get it all on-chain, right, is exactly that. You talked about these phases of, you know, Web3. There was some sense of the zeroth phase, which was smart contracts before blockchains. Right? To me, you know, what we've always been about is the behavior in the smart contracts, the, you know, software that's enforcing the terms of relationship, and you could do that on a website. I mean, eBay, PayPal, Venmo, they all do smart contracts. They just clearly have a trusted guy in the middle, right? And some combination of that and getting those smart contracts up onto a blockchain, which is much higher reliability, and so you don't have that trusted intermediary or that vulnerability in the middle would be great. And I think that chain abstraction is currently straddling, you know, those off-chain versus on-chain things. For the, so, you know, where does that show up on your radar?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a spectrum there, and I think per use case, there's a very different things you need to do. I think for a lot of the trading use cases and financial use cases in general, I do think the intent type architecture is just so much simpler, and it allows to aggregate liquidity and aggregate kind of access without needing to sign every single thing in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. Like imagine, you know, I say, hey, I want to buy whatever, a Bitcoin for Solana USDC. Like, I don't want to think about how that's going to be, you know, executed, right? Like, is this going through like Ethereum, you know, through Sword Chain, through like IBC bouncing through osmosis into Ethereum and then going through WBTC and then unwrapping. Like, this is not something I want to know ever.
You just poked at one of my problems that I see in the chain abstraction, in some of the chain abstraction rhetoric. So much of it is focused on the swaps, right? Intents is mostly focused on, and there's a lot of volume. That's a huge part of crypto right now. But it's a relatively small part of the economy.
Well, but the way I, like, swaps are more of a, so like the way I have this, like, what is blockchain really good at, right? It's a good registry for identity. It's a good registry for ownership. It's good for payments, and it's good for marketplaces. And swaps, in a way, represents marketplaces, right? You can swap, you know, a guitar for something else, right? For a piano, right? And like, that is a swap, that is an intent. I have a piano, I want a guitar, and then we somehow figure out how to settle it. And you can have everything between, right? Like, you have a compute marketplace for GPUs, for AI. You can have, and so that is, I think, like, a lot of our life is in general marketplaces, right? I want to apply to a university, right? There is lots of universities, there's lots of applicants. It's a very inefficient marketplace, which is, by the way, judged based on how many applications are. So there's a lot of things
really
we
put out an intent, which is, okay, I'll pay $5,000 for a 4-year education, and I don't care where?
Well, you don't say you don't care where. I'm saying I want to be able to pass this test afterwards, right? And I want to have this knowledge.
Right,
so you need to specify what you actually want to receive, right? You want the outcome, not the 4-year education is not an outcome. That's just, you know, wasted time.
Sorry.
I want an outcome of this knowledge.
What I mean is, I want to go to that school.
Yeah.
So the key thing that I mean by that is, so there's a lot of the stuff that you see in like the cake stack and a lot of the intent stuff, which is, it's all about, as I said, it's all about these swaps. But anything where you're doing, lock up collateral to get a stable token.
Yeah. I
I don't want to lock up collateral with a random contract on some chain I don't know about. I want to lock it into IST and mint IST, right? I want to, a lot of the economy, and what I hope a lot of the new economy is long-lived trustworthy arrangements rather than mere anonymous transactions. And so the question is, a question for intents is, how do they help us move to that? And maybe the answer is they don't. I mean, there's plenty of stuff to do.
Well, I mean, what you just described isn't, I mean, to be clear, I'm not like a the intent maxi here, but I'm just specifically what you described. I have this dollar or whatever. I have this collateral, and what I meant to ST is literally an intent, right?
Fair enough.
So you have IST and you have a you have a debt collateral on your account. But like generally speaking, I agree. Intents are an extremely useful tool for a subset of use cases. There is another subset of use cases where you do want like a specific plan of execution that you can run. And this is where my point is, again, you don't want to have this like multi-dimensional like signing process across every single intermediary. You want a way to facilitate that and like route that and have somebody else to figure out all the grungy details of how to pay transaction fees and related transaction and which RPC to send it to, and is that nodes are down and I need to reroute it, etc. Like, and this is where, I mean, chain signatures are kind of the tool for that. Is it's able to say, well, I want to deposit that collateral and mint IST, and here's a transaction. You guys figure out how to send it, right? It's not. This is actually not the intent. This is literally, a proper transaction. But I, as a user, don't need to think about all the intermediate steps there either.
Okay, so people may have heard about chain signatures, but a softball, right? There's general chain abstraction, there's chain signatures, and there's account abstraction, which I know Vitalik is very interested in, which slightly touches on chain abstraction, but it's not the same. Can you sort of clarify, from your perspective, the difference?
The dichotomy?
In 1 minute.
So I think the high level is this, right? The chain abstraction is a mindset. To me, like this is like where we're trying to remove this complexity from the user. Account abstraction was more of a like, how do we do it? Well, we don't want the user to have this binding relationship to a public key on a blockchain where now they're not able to do anything else, right? You don't able to pass it to anyone. You're not able to recover it on different device. You're not able to set up that your friends. You're not able to pass it to a custody. And so that's kind of where account abstraction come in. Is like, hey, how do we make accounts to be more of a kind of programmable object that you're able to do a lot of things with? So NEAR built that as well from day one.
So did Agoric.
And so now the question was, okay, well, now we have different account abstractions on different chains. EVM is doing its own account abstraction. We have Safe, which is really good and provides account abstraction, but then it's like a whole separate thing that like you need to use in a very different way, right? You need to open an app inside their app, right, and stuff like this. So, and then kind of what we, again, from a chain abstraction mindset is, well, how do we unify this? How do we make it such that you can use kind of one, let's say, master account and then log in everywhere? How do you able to go to any chain and not think about how to send transactions, how to pay for fees, what fee token is used, etc. And so that's where kind of chain signature is coming from. It's a technology that allows NEAR accounts to send transactions from other chains and not worry about all of the details of routing, payments, etc.
Who's running those MPCs?
So it's starting in a more kind of permissioned way because of some of the limitations. But the idea is over time we want to add both NEAR stakers and eigenlayer restakers to kind of become validators of that as we can scale the number of nodes.
So now I'll talk a tiny bit about orchestration, right? I talked about orchestration before, and that's from our perspective, or rather our focus and our emphasis is is programmability of this async activity across multiple chains. And that addresses, both chain abstraction, or a big chunk of it, of you've got this connection, but now how do I do a use case that spans these things and can roll into it everything from CCDP to socket to router to eigenlayer, all, and all these different connectivity things to be able to program interesting cross-chain use cases. I'm curious, you've seen us talk about that, and we've been at multiple events. You've seen some of the Agoric stack. But I've not actually gotten a lot of your reaction or feedback or thoughts about it. I'm curious if you have thoughts about it that you want to share with 50 of your closest friends.
You're like putting me on the spot here.
Oh, huh? I can, yeah, I am. Didn't mean to do that. Right?
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah.
He did ask for spicy.
Yeah, we asked for spicy. Yeah. No, I think, as I said, I think for different use cases, we need different set of tools, right? So if you do want to execute something, and again, if it's a long-lived relationship, you do need a very different setup. I mean, Anoma is very much saying, everything can be done with intents. I don't really subscribe to that either. And so I do think, putting a lot of these relationships on chain, allowing to have this traceability on these relationships is extremely important. And allows us to really move forward on a bunch of new use cases. I think the questions I'm mostly thinking is, how do we actually break out of some of the conversations we have been having, right, for past a year now, but actually, how do we get more people to build applications on this? What is the level of because maybe for context, right? When we started chain abstraction, kind of trying to get this mindset going, and when you go to some of the venture capital, they were like, okay, this is bullshit. This is not going to happen, right? The best answer I've got, okay, this is 5 years out, right? And they were like, nobody cares about this right now. And so to me, that's kind of bigger question is we have all those pieces. They're really all interesting on its own, right? The challenge is how do we give examples, a very specific example, for somebody to build an app, right? That's why swaps are just so easy because everybody understands them. Lending is good example of or borrowing stablecoin.
The swaps version of I have asset over here and I want asset over there, and those are on different ecosystems. That's the swaps thing, but it's nightmarishly hard without all of the stuff that we're building. So.
Exactly, yeah. But I think we do need some more examples which go beyond that. And I think this is where, you guys have been pushing a lot, right? And we kind of thinking about this as well. That's why I don't know if you saw my talk, but I was using examples of subscriptions, right? Yeah, this is something that
long-lived relationship,
that you need to facilitate, where this is something that's been impossible to do in Web3 for pretty much forever, and it's something that people want because nobody wants to pay a millicent every time and sign on the thing. I just want to pay $5 a month and just access the stuff, right? And so I think this is where we need more of those examples, and I think you guys doing a lot of good job there.
I'd say my model of fixing problems is usually ship code. So we are shipping our orchestration core. It's in testnet now, and it should go out on mainnet next week. So, okay. And then, Calypso will demo later, and they'll be deploying on top of that. So, in terms of moving things forward, you guys are shipping, we're shipping. I think that
everybody's shipping.
Yeah,
you guys
not
shipping,
everyone's
shipping.
You get a chain, and you get a chain. But to me, we're at the tipping point where suddenly these things are actually possible that we've been talking about for a year.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's a transformation that's happening hopefully this summer, and so by September we should all have a bunch of production use cases, and instead of talking about it, people can just use it. We can wrap up and all just enjoy a beer.
That's right. The other thing, at the beginning of the year, I went to an investor event. This was, the House of Web3 or something, and asked, so what do you know about chain abstraction? And about 1/3 of the investors there had heard of it. It was it's sort of interesting, maybe, whatever. Ever since then, ever since February, our first chain abstraction day that we did, every event I'll go and ask, so have you heard of chain abstraction? Not only have they usually heard of it now, but they can play back to me a pretty reasonable thing about what it is, user-focused, stuff on any chain. Here's what I think of it. Multiple funds. I was at yeah, actually, we were both at an event a couple weeks ago where multiple VCs reported, yes, they're getting chain abstraction proposal after chain abstraction proposal. So it really, it is very different from where it was even at the beginning of the year. What's sort of the most interesting thing you've seen in terms of signal around that?
Well, I mean, I think that event we were both at, that was kind of so it was like in San Francisco, right? Small event, and then two VCs were saying like, oh yeah, I had 3 pitches today of chain abstraction, and the other VC is like, yeah, I also had 2 pitches today of chain abstraction. And we're like, high five.
That's right. Our work here is not done, but now we can go do coding.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that this has been a really good example of kind of building out the movement and really showcasing what you can do. And now, now we need to ship applications. That's really why.
No, now they need to ship applications.
Yeah, they need to ship applications. And I think overall, the other signal is just like, there's people who are just like starting to build something on, our tech stack, on other tech stacks, who kind of just thinking that way already, right? So the mindset is changing, and I think that's the important part. I think the piece that I still think not there is the way people evaluate ecosystems and the way people think about what success looks like. Because I do still get like, but what's a value accrual? Those questions, or like, what's a TVL? Why is TVL and NEAR so low, right? It's like, well, if you assume chain abstraction, what does TVL and NEAR even mean, right? Is application that uses chain abstraction that has assets across 50 chains, is that TVL on NEAR? Is it TVL on those chains? Like those questions.
Total value accessible is what I want.
The reality is like how much money developers made at the end. Like if you think of like any platforms, at the end it was how much success did people on top of the platform had. Right? And everything else is just like a kind of a proxy.
So do you measure that? Is there an ability to track that yet?
Not really, because, outside of just like basic fees that swaps are making and some lending protocols are making, it's really hard to capture like
still early.
How much. But that's kind of what like I'm thinking. Like, what is the total market of the applications building on top of, again, not even NEAR, but like the whole ecosystem, the whole Web3, and like, are we actually bringing value? Like that's the part that I'm mostly, like I had this like long tweet thread because I got kind of annoyed, and so like there's been so much wealth creation in crypto, but the value creation have definitely not caught up with that, right? And again, if you look at like outside world, the way it's judging crypto is based on value creation, not based on total market cap of all coins, right? And so we kind of need to fix that.
And chain abstraction to me is, the primary narrative that is about how do we deliver value to users. That's
exactly, yeah. How do we deliver the value, but also again, it's a mindset change from TVL and token launches, et cetera, on any specific chain, which I think drove this very weird kind of economic incentives and fact that like you can fund every single chain and like copy the same stuff and it's gonna make a ton of money, but actually starting to think about like how do we create value? Because again, this is like we have users onboarding, they're using the stuff, et cetera. But I think we're over time.
Oh, we're over time, all right. Okay, so in that case, that means we have like 30 seconds for the how does AI relate to chain abstraction? Not to blockchain, but to chain abstraction.
So there's two things. One is something, for example, Minbase and now it's called BitPay wallet does, which is you can literally describe what you want, right? Like the example I like because it's very complicated to execute, which is I want to build an index of top 10 tokens that were issued in the last 3 months and buy $100 worth of it, right? And so what they do, they pretty much have agents that parse these types of transaction, they figure out how to execute it, and then they use chain signatures to execute it across all the chains where these assets will be, right? So that's kind of high level, like if you think you have all of this complexity now across many, many chains, well, natural language is a really good way to kind of navigate in this multidimensional space. And you still want some user interface, et cetera. Like it's going to be a mixed experience. But this is a really good example of like something that if you try to do manually, like even if you have chain signatures, you still like, you're going to spend a ton of time figuring out how to like build that index, how much to buy, et cetera. So I think that's like AI is kind of as an interface is really good. And again, we see this in Web 2, we'll see that in Web 3. There's on the other side, obviously, we moving in a world where we have AI agents paying each other, transacting with other APIs, et cetera, and like AI agents don't really care. Like they want to kind of transact across all chains and be able to find the best, again, it's a marketplace in some way, like what's the best execution across like for a specific intent that agent has to be done. And so again, this is where a lot of this tooling comes in to really facilitate that and not need for each agent to have like balances everywhere, figure out execution, all of the stuff, which like is complicated and should be done by a professional.
Good. Good. And people had that question. For us, chain abstraction gives us a channel to be able to consolidate what we'll bring out to Web 2 developers as they start moving into this space. So it's sort of critical for all these different initiatives. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for this conversation. Next time, we should tell people what we're planning to do between Agoric and NEAR. So,
sounds good.
But not till next time.
Tune in for next time.